All right. I think we can get started. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ben Gettleman. I work with Kearns and West. I'm going to be the facilitator for today's meeting. My colleagues Tom Fisher and Henry DeRuff are also on the Zoom today to support the meeting and taking notes. If you have any questions for us, you can put that in the chat. Just want to welcome everyone to today's planning group meeting. This is the fourth meeting of the planning group. And we're gonna start by walking through the agenda, and then I think we'll get to some introductions. So let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, so I'm just going to talk through the objectives to start. So similar to recent meetings, we're going to start by revisiting outcomes from the previous planning group meeting, which was on July 13th, and just follow up on any action items or discussion topics. I think as many or all of you are aware that there have been some significant developments on the Potter Valley project side since they last met. So we're going to have an overview. We have some representatives of the proponents of the new Eel Russian facility proposal that was recently submitted to PG&E. So we're going to get a presentation from the proponents, and then we'll have some time for discussion, some questions of the proponents, and also just the path forward for the planning group in light of the proposal that was submitted and the next steps in that process. We'll also do some updates on recent working group meetings that have happened since the last meeting and talk about anticipated working group meetings that are going to be coming up soon. And then similar to all planning group meetings, we will have time at the end of the meeting for public comment. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, let's do some introductions of planning group members. Well, actually, I think what we'll do is let me go through the agenda and a couple of the ground rules, then we'll get to introductions, so everything is kind of in one place. So to get us through the objectives I just reviewed, we'll start with the review of the last meeting. We'll then get to the proposal, a presentation on the proposal. Then we'll have a good amount of time for discussion of the proposal and the path forward. And then we'll wrap up with the working group process and upcoming meetings and public comment. And the meeting is scheduled to go from 10 till 1 today. Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, and just a reminder, I think planning group members certainly know this. Anyone that is new to attending a planning group meeting, welcome. And just a reminder of the purpose of the planning group that's outlined in the charter. It's to seek to identify water supply resiliency solutions that respond to PG&E's planned decommissioning of the Potter Valley project, while also protecting tribal interests and supporting the stewardship of fisheries, water quality, and recreation in both the Russian River and the Eel River Basin. So just want to, as a reminder of what this group has been convened to do. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, just some participation guidelines here. We just recognize there are a lot of interests here, and I think that's the real strength of the group. And we ask folks to be mutually respectful of those differences and actively listen. We're going to do our best to manage the conversation in an orderly way. And we do have planning group members and some alternates representing in place of planning group members. Our request is that for one slot, there just be one member that participate at a time. And discussion in the meeting is really intended to focus on planning group members. Members of the public are welcome to be here. We're glad you're here. And we will have public comment at the end of the meeting. And we just ask you respectfully to wait until public comment to share your comments, just to help us keep the meeting organized. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so for planning group members, we're going to ask you to raise your hand. We'll create a queue just so we can kind of keep the discussion structured. You can use the chat function, but please use it for technical assistance if something isn't quite working or you've got a kind of a technical question. We're not going to really use that to sort of have a back and forth discussion in the meeting. It's a little hard to track. We are going to ask planning group members to please rename yourself. So if you go to your little tile, you go to the top right, there's 3 dots, click on that and rename yourself. Please put a PG in the front and your first and last name and your affiliation. That will make sure we know that you're a planning group member, and we can then call on you. If we don't know you're a planning group member, you might not get called on. So please do put PG in front of your name. Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, so as I just mentioned, members of the public are invited to share during the public comment period. Please stay on mute. This is for everyone. Please stay on mute unless you're speaking to the group, just to cut down on any background noise. And when we get to public comment, we'll ask you to raise your hand, and then we'll create a queue for members of the public. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so I think what we'll do, just in the interest of time here, is on the introductions, we're just going to ask planning group members to introduce yourselves through the chat. I see some folks have already done that. So just want to invite others just to type in your name, your affiliation into the chat so folks know you're here. But just to be mindful of time, I think we'll just do it through the chat. So just give folks a second to do that. And then we'll get to the next, the first agenda item here. Mike Thompson, we're going to need a PG in front of your name.
Okay. Thanks, Ben. I'm looking for my 3 dots and I couldn't find them. Sorry.
It's okay. Same for Supervisor McGordy. We know you're in there. Okay. Well, welcome to the members who are here and members of the public. Thank you for joining today. I'm going to just start with a recap of our meeting that took place about a month ago. So let's go to the next slide, please. So I think as folks who participated in that meeting will recall, the meeting really focused on water resiliency, and I think we thought it was a very productive conversation. The first thing that we talked about in the meeting was there had been some discussion on working group meetings and whether those meetings should be open to the public or just for working group members. And the steering committee had a discussion around that and ultimately proposed a hybrid option where some meetings or some portions of the meeting where the discussion would really be focused on sharing information, that those would be open, both sort of open to the public and open to all members. And then to the extent that there's sensitive topics that need to be discussed, those meetings or those portions of those meetings would be private and just planning group members. So that's the approach that the planning group supported. We're sort of figuring this out as we go, but I think it gives everyone some flexibility in terms of how we want to structure these conversations. So we're glad we were able to reach some agreement there. I think we're in good shape on the charter. There were some helpful comments on the resiliency section, and once that subcommittee gets started, we'll revisit that text, and then I think we'll be good to go on the charter. And then a good portion of the meeting again focused on resiliency work, and I think what we all were able to see is there's a lot of resiliency work going on in the Russian River Basin. And I thought it was really want to just thank those who presented at the last meeting. I think it really provided a helpful picture of what's currently going on. And I think it gave us some ideas around what the subcommittee could focus on. I think we all heard that there's support for that. I think another important takeaway was that the planning group generally agreed that the diversion is needed in the short term, and that there's a longer term goal here of self-sufficiency while also pursuing a 2-basin solution that incorporates Eel River fish passage. So I think that was a helpful discussion to have and get clarity among the group on that. And then we did have public comment. So thanks for those who contributed to that. Okay, so I think what I'll do is I want to just see if any planning group members had anything to add in terms of reflections or takeaways from the last planning group meeting, from the discussion we had, or anything that came out of it. So I'll just, if anyone has any thoughts, please do raise your hand, and we have a little bit of time to get some reflections on that. Okay, Mike.
Yeah, I just I'd like to, thank all of the presenters from the last meeting, and even as someone who works and is heavily involved in the Russian River, I actually learned quite a bit. There were many things that were going on that I actually was unaware of. So just wanted to say thanks to those who presented, and also I think appreciated the really good discussion following that. So I just want to do a quick shout of appreciation for that last meeting, both the presenters and then the discussion that followed. Thanks.
Right. Let's go to Matt and then Vivian.
Yeah, Matt Cliff with Trout Unlimited. I thought I had a comment on this, and I'm actually not sure I do. I'm struggling with the nomenclature here. This is the planning group meeting, which is the smaller group, right? That's the kind of the core. And we're not talking about this group that's meeting today, but a smaller group that has the planning function. And these are notes from that meeting. Is that right?
So we are in a planning group meeting now, and this is the planning group meeting that took place July 13th. So this is the larger group.
Thank you. I'm not tracking the nomenclature, keeping track of it all. I guess my one comment is I would question a little bit the characterization in the second to the last bullet of having like there being consensus that the diversion is quote unquote needed. I mean, there's certainly impacts that would come from not having the diversion in the short term, and those would be, pretty serious, et cetera. And, that's something that one would want to try to avoid if we can. But yeah, having this characterized as like needed, like this consensus, like, oh, we have to do whatever we can to keep that no matter what. I wouldn't want to create that impression, because, everything's a trade-off, right? So there's some things we'll be able to do and some things we won't, depending how things shake out. So that was my one comment there, just seeing how this is being recorded. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for that, Matt. And maybe a way to reframe that is, I think the discussion was it's needed to meet current demand, and that in that over time, with the reduction of demand, perhaps a diversion wouldn't be as needed, if that makes sense.
Well, and if the diversion isn't, well, we will have unmet demand at certain times under certain conditions. If we don't have the diversion, that's certainly true.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Let's go to Vivian. Yeah. Oh, go ahead. One more thought.
Well, no, I mean, under any scenario, you're going to have times when you don't have enough supply to meet demand, right? That's my only thing, and that'll get worse if there's not a diversion in the short term. That's what I would say about that. I think that's enough. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Let's go to Vivian.
I agree with Matt on the framing as needed, because if the supply does not meet the demand, then the supply is over allocated. But what I wanted to say was that I was really impressed with the measures that people have taken to conserve, to reuse water, and they've had very little diversion during the last few years of the drought and the shutdown of the power plant. And so there's been a great deal of adaptation that has gone on already. And I want to congratulate and admire the agencies, the groups, the people of the towns for doing what they showed us at that last meeting toward adaptation and resiliency. Thank you.
Thanks, Vivian. Okay. I think goes up. Supervisor Crandall.
Yes, I'd have to agree with the gentleman who mentioned that about the agreeing with the diversion. Lake County has stated before that they're not necessarily in opposition nor supporting, but we'll look at that in the future. But one of the things too is that just like the interests of others regarding the dams, some especially on the Russian River, are not necessarily concerned with the decommissioning or the commissioning. They're concerned more about the diversion. That's kind of the same concept, if you will, about Lake County. we're concerned about, we've always stated we're concerned about the decommissioning of the dam. Whatever happens on the other side, we're looking at that with you all. And basically, again, we're here because if we're not here, then it is portrayed that we're not interested, or we're given an opportunity to be at the table, but then we're not there. So just want to mention that, and appreciate the time.
Thanks, Supervisor Crandall. Okay, not seeing any other hands. So I'm going to suggest we move to the next agenda topic here. Oh, I see. Alicia, did you have a thought?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was waving instead of raising my hand. I just want to echo what Eddie Crandall just said, which is that, I think portraying anything as like a consensus decision in this group is really a tricky thing to do, because, just like Lake County, I think a lot of fisheries groups, we kind of have to be here to keep up to speed with what's going on. But I don't want our participation in this to be misconstrued as support or agreement for things that we don't necessarily support. That being said, we recognize that a continued diversion is highly desirable. But just, I would say that we don't necessarily agree that it's absolutely necessary.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think we can appreciate the nuance. Okay. Great. Okay, let's go to the next topic. So I want to introduce, we have 3 presenters who are going to present on the new eel Russian facility proposal. We have Scott Shapiro from Downey Brand, who represents Mendocino Inland Water and Power Commission. We have Erica Costa from Berkey Williams, that's representing Round Valley Indian Tribes, and Adam Brand, who works for Sonoma Water. So we want to invite Scott, Erica, and Adam to provide the presentation on the proposal. As a reminder, we did send the proposal document out to the planning group members yesterday, so you all should have that document, and we can certainly reshare that if that's useful. So I'm going to turn it over to our 3 presenters, and then we'll have some time for questions. And then also just want to acknowledge that we have Grant Davis here from Sonoma Water, who's also available to participate in the discussion when we get to it. So I want to welcome the 4 of you. So over to you, and hopefully you all can share your screen.
Hi, this is Greg Young. I'm Potter Valley Tribe. I am present.
Okay, welcome.
Good morning, Ben. Thank you for the chance to present today. I know it was last minute, but I did just email a few minutes ago the presentation to you and to Henry. And if you're able to do the screen share, it might be a little bit easier, since we're going to all be presenting, and that way you can be the master controller, and we can all indicate when it's time to advance slides.
Yeah, I see that. Henry, do you have it? Yes.
You got it.
Very good. Thank you so much. So as Ben indicated, the 3 of us today are happy to have a chance to speak with you about the joint proposal we made to PG&E about 2 weeks ago. I'm special counsel for the Mendocino County Inland Water and Power Commission. Erica Costa and Adam Brand can introduce themselves when we get to their section of the presentation. And if you would advance to the next slide, I want to provide a little bit of context for how we got here, and then I'll do a brief presentation overview. So I think everybody knows that as early as half a dozen years ago, Mendocino County Inland Water and Power Commission, along with Sonoma County Water Agency, along with RVIT, Round Valley Indian Tribes, and in a partnership with Caltrout and with Humboldt County, we're working to try to figure out how, upon PG&E's conclusion with the project, water could continue to be diverted into the Russian River watershed while doing so in a way which would support habitat restoration and hopefully a complete return to those species that have been so damaged by the way the system had been operated for over 100 years. And that effort that we had started, called the Two Basin Partnership, ultimately was not able to advance as we had hoped it would. And we found ourselves in a notice of decommissioning from PG&E. And I think all of you, many of you in the room were getting phone calls from PG&E with updates. And in one of those updates, PG&E let us know, when I'm saying us, I should say Mendocino County Inland Water, I'll speak for myself, let Mendocino County Inland Water know that PG&E was open to receiving a proposal on acquisition of some of the facilities if we sought to do so. As a result of that, Mendocino County Inland, working with Sonoma County Water Agency, had a series of discussions with PG&E to learn more about what PG&E meant and what might be acceptable. And that ultimately led to the development of the proposal that you'll see today. That proposal was shaped significantly by a lot of the discussion that has been occurring within this body as we learned what issues remained important to people. I was also significantly shaped by the prior work that was done in the context of the Two Basin Partnership. As that proposal started ripening into something that Mendocino County Inland and Sonoma thought might be a viable path, we reached out to RVIT and asked if RVIT had an interest in participating with us, and that ultimately led to a three-party proposal, which we'll present to you today. So the presentation will be that we're going to run through the document itself in order, and I'll do the first part. Erica will do a middle part, and then Adam will do the last part, and then we're available to answer questions at the end. So Henry, if you could advance to the next slide. So what we have requested is that PG&E include in its draft plan, which will be releasing later this year, the following information. And the following information sets criteria upon which, if we meet those criteria, PG&E would include this information in its final plan as well. And we are asking PG&E to share that it is considering a proposal, which we've called the new Eel Russian facility, that PG&E will, as I said, it will include that proposal in its final license surrender if consistent with a schedule that will run through 4 criteria are met. And so now we'll run through those 4 criteria. Next slide, please, Henry. So the first criteria is that a regional entity has been formed and has the legal capacity for ownership, construction, and operation of the facility, and is developing the financial capacity for ownership, construction, and operation of the facility. So a few things here. One is that the regional entity we're talking about, and we've discussed this with PG&E, will not necessarily, in fact, not likely be whatever the final regional entity is that would operate the facility. And part of that is because one of the things we will be working on is figuring out what the business model is for this operation. Who are the beneficiaries? Who are paying? And you really need to know that to know who should be in leadership of the regional entity. And so what we're talking about now is the creation of what I'll call an interim regional entity. That doesn't mean it has to be interim. It could be the final if everything lined up, but it is likely not to be the final form. And that regional entity would be formed and would ultimately have the legal ability to do the things needed and would be developing the financial capacity to do those things needed. So that's the first criteria. And you'll see in the timeline later, the timeline by which we commit to achieve that. Next slide, please. So here's the second item that we committed to do as part of the proposal. And with this, I'll hand it over to Erica.
Thanks, Scott. And good morning, everybody. As Scott said, I'm Erica Costa. I'm an attorney at Berkey Williams, and we represent the Round Valley Indian Tribes as both their general counsel and then in this matter as their special water counsel. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about this second criteria and the key components here in thinking about a regional solution that focuses on water supply reliability, but also the key for the Round Valley Indian Tribes of a restored, healthy Eel River fishery as well. So the second criteria here is that the regional entity has selected a design that's well documented in a design report, the design that fully implements the co-equal objectives of fish migration and water diversions. And that the facility and those two sort of expanding on those two co-equal objectives are the facility will be designed for upstream and downstream fish migration with the goal of achieving naturally reproducing, self-sustaining and harvestable native and androgynous fish population. And I think something key here that we've been thinking about from the tribe's perspective is that unobstructed fish migration at Cape Horn Dam, or the new diversion facility, I should say, is a key component. But we also know that other key processes are important here too, and that's the flows, the rate of flows, and the diversion, and also habitat. So migration, ability to migrate is a key piece, but there are other important pieces that are part of this analysis too that will be part of the bigger picture of a restoration goal on the Eel River. And the second, as I said, co-equal goal being the facility will include the physical capacity for material and continued water diversion through the existing tunnel from the Eel River into the Russian River. So again, talking about capacity for material and continued water, so reliable water source. And finally, another important piece here is that the fish migration and the diversions, the time at which those happen, the rate, and those sort of technical pieces in the selected design will be on conditions mutually agreed upon by the proponents of the proposal that protect the fishing rights and water rights of the Round Valley Indian Tribes. So that was really key from the Round Valley Indian Tribes perspective is, I think I've shared with this group before, presented on the Round Valley Indian Tribes reserved fishing and water rights in the Eel River, and the desire to advance those rights and a potential resolution of those rights as part of or in tandem with this process. So we wanted to be sure and preserve that whatever option is selected and moving forward, it's consistent with those rights. So I think that's all I have to add on that part. I'm sure there will be questions which I'm happy to answer, but you can go on to the next slide. And I think I will pass it over to Adam with that.
Great. Thank you, Erica and Scott. My name is Adam Brand. I'm Chief Deputy County Counsel with the County of Sonoma. I, along with Corey O'Donnell and Vern Ball, represent Sonoma County Water Agency. The third portion of this proposal that we all submitted requires that the regional entity agree with PG&E on the terms for a purchase and sale agreement for the project works that are listed in attachment 2 to the proposal. That agreement would need to assure that the regional entity would bear the additional costs, risks, and liabilities of the proposal relative to what would be PG&E's decommissioning plan. So any added costs, risks that PG&E would not be, or that they would be incurring if they agree to this proposal, would be borne by the regional entity and not by PG&E. That it also provides for appropriate consideration for the purchase of the works, and that provides for closing and transfer of fee title to the project works that are listed in attachment 2, concurrent with the partial transfer of the P77 license. And we'll get to that in a little bit more about the concept of the partial transfer of license. Could you please move to the next slide? Thank you. The proposal also requires that the regional entity will have received support from the National Marine Fisheries Service and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and then from representative governmental and non-governmental entities from the Russian and Eel River basins. Next slide, please. We, as the proponents, have requested that PG include in their draft decommissioning plan that's due out in November of this year, that their final license application will request that FERC create a non-power license for the project works listed in attachment 2. That would be held by the regional entity. This was an important part of our proposal. We believe this would help relieve PG&E of any concern they might have for being required under the surrender order to construct works that they don't intend to own or operate. So by requesting this, the intent here is that the regional entity would not only have the contractual responsibility for constructing the project works that are requested to be under the surrender order, but they would have that regulatory burden under the non-power license to do so, so that would relieve PG&E of any concern they might have. The non-power license would be effective once FERC issued their license surrender order for the remaining portions of the project that PG&E would be responsible for dealing with or removing as they will see fit, and that they will propose in their surrender order. And PG&E and the proponents would confirm that the license surrender order and the non-power license that is issued by FERC are consistent with the relevant terms of the purchase and sale agreement, such that if FERC put something in there that wasn't anticipated or is inconsistent with the purchase and sale, then we wouldn't be moving forward if it wasn't something that we could work with. Next slide, please. This is the schedule that you've seen in the proposal. So I'm not going to read this verbatim. I think everyone can see it, but August 15th, the proponents would begin discussions with PG&E as a proxy for the regional entity on the purchase and sale agreement. And by October 31st of this year, the proponents will be seeking to report to PG&E on the outcome of preliminary consultations with NEMS, CDFW, and other stakeholders in the Eel and Russian River basins to support incorporation of our proposal into their surrender application, and that's due out in November. The proponents will consult on the options described in attachment 3 for the various version proposals. And by this time, proponents will convene a table to begin negotiations for a settlement with respect to the approach that we're proposing for the new Eel Russian River facility in the license surrender application. And then November 30th, PG&E is due to release their draft surrender application for its own stakeholder consultation. This won't be filed with FERC. This is just to receive comment back. And then by the end of the year, the proponents will form the JPA, the interim regional entity, as Scott described at the beginning. This entity will coordinate on the respective steps and subsequent steps, and will become the counterparty in any negotiations with PG&E for the purchase and sale agreement. Next slide, please. May 31st, 2024, PG&E is due to release its draft surrender application. It's further refinements to that. That is my understanding filed with FERC. Before this date, proponents will submit to PG&E a draft of the license surrender application, the portion that deals with the proposal, the Eel Russian facility, and proposing a non-power license. This application will reflect the progress on the proposal that you've seen in paragraphs 1 through 4 already. And then November 30th, 2024, PG&E and the regional entity will reach agreement on the purchase and sale agreement terms, a binding term sheet. Also, proponents will reach a term sheet or agreement in principle with agencies and representative stakeholders on key terms related to the license surrender application portion of the Eel Russian River facility portion of the license surrender application. And then January 1st or 31st, 2025, PG&E files the license surrender application with FERC. The regional entity is a co-applicant for that portion of the application dealing with the Eel Russian River facility. Next slide, please. The attachment 2 includes the various facilities and appurtenances associated with the Cape Horn Dam and Van Arsdale diversion that the proponents are seeking to retain to create the new diversion facility. You can go to sonomawater.org/regional partnership for the proposal, including all those attachments. Next slide, please. So attachment 3 is the design options. This was born out of a lot of the good work that we were able to do with our partners, Caltrout and Humboldt, and other stakeholders, and out of the Congressman Huffman's Two Basin Solution group. Attachment 3 includes 2 design options for the new Eel Russian facility. One is a control section with pump station, which would require the regional entity to modify and lower Cape Horn Dam and construct a pump station to divert water. The other option is a roughened channel. This would entail removing the concrete gravity portion of Cape Horn Dam and construct a approximately 800-foot long channel with an upstream backwater control for a modified diversion structure. Both alternatives are included in Sonoma Water's Bureau of Reclamation grant application for further study and are currently being studied under Sonoma Water's DWR grant to take those to 30% design. Next slide, please. So looking back and moving forward, I think Scott did a good job of explaining how we got here and what we did to get here. And what's next is, I think we've just run through with what the requirements are for the proponents and what the requirements will be for the new regional entity once that's formed. And I think we're all free to answer questions if there are any.
Okay, thanks, Scott. Erica and Adam, want to see if planning group members have questions for the presenters. Just raise your hand. I see your hand, John. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just had I assume the answer is to avoid a whole level of difficulty, but the not having the ability to generate power through this agreement, is that forever? Does that preclude that none of that weight of that water coming down could ever be used for power generation? And just correct me if I'm assuming that eliminating the power section of this agreement eliminates a whole level of difficulty. I'm just curious as to why that was eliminated.
Well, the NOI parties, as they were originally called, which was Sonoma Water, Mendocino County Inland Water and Power Commission, Round Valley Indian Tribes, Humboldt County, and Caltrout, did try. They filed a notice of intent to seek a new power license. We were unfortunately unable to move forward with that and did not meet FERC's deadline last April, and so then FERC ordered PG&E to provide a plan and a surrender order. So at this point in time, there's no option for a power generating license. What would, in order for a new, my understanding, and I'm not a FERC lawyer, but my understanding is for a new power generation license, you would have to start over once the FERC surrender order was terminated and complete, and then somebody would be seeking a new power license at that point in time.
Okay, and that clears it up. It wasn't the discussion with PG&E that eliminates the ability to generate power. It was the failure to meet FERC's deadline for an agreement to generate power, which had already passed. Thank you.
Nicole, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Hey Tanani, Sintama, heyo heyo. My name is Nicole Whipple, and thank you, John, for that question. That was a question that I had as well about the power plant. But my question is really based on what the diversion does and how it includes the caretaking of Lake Mendocino, that area and the tribes involved there. I think I've shared a few times before that, you know, I've been a resident of Mendocino County, Round Valley, as well as Humboldt County, and I lived, you know, right there in Redwood Valley for 15 years of my life. And so I have seen this lake just be come to a very hot mess, and I'm just curious how this proposal plans to, who then, Mendocino County, when are you gonna step up and care for our county and prioritize taking care of that location and the safety of our rec? Thank you.
So is that question clear to Scott, Erica, and Adam?
Well, I will take a crack at saying, I think it's clear and I think it's a legitimate question. I just think it's outside the scope of the presentation that we're making today. We three entities came together. I like to think of it to put a foot in the door that was closing. PG&E had set a deadline by which a proposal had to be made. And we put our foot in the door to prevent that door from closing, to allow the idea of a partnership of Russian River and Eel River interests to both preserve the diversion, but also prioritize restoration of habitat. And the proposal deals with that diversion. It does not deal with the downstream issue that Ms. Whipple has raised. And I know I certainly couldn't answer it. I don't know if Erica or Adam feel that they can, but I don't feel like we're equipped to address that issue today.
Thanks, Scott. And Nicole, did you have
So
a
you don't
follow-up?
believe Mendocino County? Yes, thank you. Yeah, so in this proposal, the diversion, we're talking about a diversion facility, but you don't believe that Lake Mendocino is part of that conversation at all? And can we talk about where that might fit or where that conversation can be brought?
I'll note that while my client has the word Mendocino in its name, it is the Mendocino County Inland Water and Power Commission, which is a joint powers agency of a number of entities in Mendocino. We do not have, the commission does not have jurisdiction over Lake Mendocino. And so I'm not sure the answer to your question. I'm not seeking to invalidate your question. I just don't know the answer to your question.
I'm not
Thank
quite
you, I
sure.
appreciate that.
Adam, do you want to?
I was just saying, I mean, the water from the diversion ultimately reaches Lake Mendocino. That's the way it is now. That's the way it's intended to go in the future. So I guess I'm not really sure what concerns that you're asking about. I'm happy to answer what I can, but I'm not quite clear on what your concerns are and how the diversion facility would impact Lake Mendocino. The water would, ultimately, if not diverted before it reaches Lake Mendocino, end up in Lake Mendocino. If that's helpful.
My concern is that Lake Mendocino is not mentioned or included, and that it's not being, if this is where the water is being diverted and stored, correct me if I'm wrong, before it goes to Russian River. Why is it, how do we include the caretaking and management of that facility when we're talking about, the whole purpose and is about the users, right? Russian water users, Mendocino County water users. We don't have, Mendocino County is still lacking in any access to water. I just traveled to Humboldt, just last week, and the water, it's very sad to see that the water all the way up the 101 is hardly trickling. I travel the Eel River every day on 162. And then we come out to our lake and it's just, hardly anything there. I also went to the Russian River, took my children to swim there, and also went out to Potter Valley, and, those flows are just booming and there's still water. But yeah, I think I would love to see consideration for Lake Mendocino, where your water, you have all these needs without identifying that, that's one of the only recreations that we have available here in Mendocino County, and it has been just completely decommissioned at times and just so poorly taken care of that there needs to be some consideration and priority in respecting what is being taken and what is being left behind.
No,
Thank you.
sure. Thank you.
Yeah, I think your comments noted, Nicole. I think that, you know, I just made a couple dots to connect, or that I think this, to Scott's point, that this proposal is, you know, a foot in the door, and so those details, you know, aren't really known yet. I guess a question maybe for Scott, Adam, and Erica to consider is, at some point, would that be within the purview of this decommissioning process? And would there be a time to think through that? And if not, I would say I think that's something that would fall kind of under the certainly the interests of the Water Forum in these broader contexts of resiliency. So I think that, you know, I think there's recognition, Nicole, that there's sort of a need for solutions. And so I think one question is, how does this overlap with the Potter Valley project? And the extent that there isn't overlap, I do think there's a place to have those discussions. So those are just some thoughts I'd share. But Adam, I don't know if you have anything else.
I would just note that the Lake Mendocino is owned and operated by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So it's not mentioned in this proposal because none of the proponents have any control over the recreational facilities or the actual facilities there. You know, Sonoma Water's obligation or its responsibilities relate to when the water's in the in the water supply pool, and it manages releases during that time. But even then, it's the Army Corps who's actually, you know, turning the knob, so to speak, on the flow. So there's limited ability for the proponents here to impact Lake Mendocino. As I think Scott said, this is really about the diversion in the Eel and continuing some form of diversion into the Russian, and also benefiting the Eel River and restoration as needed. But we note your concern, and, you know, certainly if there's something that we can do to assuage those or help benefit Lake Mendocino, we're absolutely going to.
And Adam, maybe if I could just add to that a little bit too. I do think it's an excellent question. It kind of highlights, you know, just how interconnected so many aspects of this project are. But I think part of the reality is that we're a little bit limited by the box that we're in with PG&E and their Potter Valley hydroelectric license that's from FERC, and sort of what that project and what that project boundary looks like too. So that's why I think our main focus has been, as Adam and Scott said, on particularly on that diversion facility, knowing that what happens there has a broader impact farther down the Eel. It has a broader impact on farther what happens down the Russian River as well too. But we're in terms of kind of focusing in on PG&E's decommissioning plan and the mechanics of that, we are sort of in a little bit of a box of looking particularly at what happens at that project when we think about this proposal. So kind of just want to highlight where our thinking sort of needs to be narrowed at this point, just given the process that we find ourselves in with PG&E, with their decommissioning and surrendering their license and part of the FERC process. So, but as I said, Nicole, great question. And again, it highlights the interconnectedness of all of this.
Okay, let's go to Supervisor McGordy.
Well, thank you. So that was a good question from Nicole. And all I can say, this is the first step on a long journey. And Mendocino County Board of Supervisors is involved with the Corps of Engineers talking about getting the facilities open again. They sustained damage to some of the utilities that supply the campground and so forth, and they've had to repair those. And I think they're about finished. So the campgrounds have been closed. There is access to the lake. And there's more to go. So long term, we'd love to see the dam raised to have more storage, which would work in well with this proposal to maybe have an additional 30,000 acre feet of storage. There's a whole issue of water quality that affects fisheries that is also being discussed. So there's a lot to it, and it's not just about water, it's also about the whole ecosystem downriver from the dam. and addressing some of the issues associated with channeling and incising and stability of the banks, and connecting some of the major tribs again hydraulically so that there's more time for the fish to be able to use the habitat. So there's a lot to work on, but this is the first step. If we don't get past this, then the rest of it becomes somewhat moot. So.
Okay, thank you, Supervisor McCourty. Other questions regarding the proposal? Matt?
Yeah, so this group we're sitting on today, so Sonoma Water, as I understand it, convened this group, this summer, early this spring, to kind of get stakeholders together from both basins and try to, discuss and have broad consensus, try to reach some consensus on water supply solutions for, what to do with the decommissioning of the project, including the idea of sending proposals to PG&E, and could we, kind of come to agreement on some terms for that, et cetera. And we've been participating in that. But what we're seeing now is at the same time as that's going on, we had now we've got a situation where a small subset of the stakeholders has gone to PG&E with a proposal at the same time as all this larger process is going on. And he didn't give a heads up to anybody on this group. And I've got some pretty great concerns about that, to even, to even notify that this was happening, much less have any input into it. And so I've got concerns about that. But I guess my question to get to the point now is why is that exactly? Why was there not, at least a heads up to folks that this was happening, so there could be, you say it's based in part on the work of this group. That's great. But why not allow at least folks here in this group to know what was going on, so there could be some broader buy-in?
I'm certainly willing to take a first crack at this. And I hear your comment, and I understand your question. This was a difficult period. I will speak for Mendocino County Inland, for the commission to decide how to proceed. In order to have our conversations with PG&E, we were required to sign an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, which really limited our abilities to take information from the discussions we were having and bring it back to a larger group. And so we were faced with the PG&E deadline of July 31. If something wasn't submitted, we could never reserve the right to advance a project, advance a proposal, advance a collaborative effort. And at the other hand, we were precluded in our agreement with PG&E that allowed us to have the discussions from talking with other people. And so we did the best we could, which was to submit a proposal, which, as we said, we think puts our foot in the door and holds the door open. The discussions at this forum shaped the proposal. You will note per Adam's presentation that a dam remain with fish ladder proposal or alternative was not included. And that was as a direct result of feedback we had gotten from the two basin partners, as well as discussions here. And so we did our best to shape a proposal consistent with what we were hearing. And you will also note the proposal remains somewhat generic, and it will continue to be shaped by conversations we have with stakeholders, with tribes, with government entities, as we try to advance this and make this work. So I don't want to minimize you feeling as though this was a place to consult. We just felt that we were in a box and didn't have the ability to do so. And I think following this presentation, Ben, as facilitator, will take this group through a conversation about what now and how are these two processes running parallel and in a collaborative and meaningfully informing way. I don't know.
So are you saying that, I'm sorry, this is important. Are you saying that the NDA with PG&E prevented you from even telling members of this group that negotiations were going on and that you were thinking about taking a proposal to them? It prohibited you from doing that?
It prohibited us from talking about the content of proposal.
About the content?
Certainly, if you would go back and think about some of the comments made over the planning group meetings by Mike Thompson, by Janet Pauley, you would hear that we knew the deadline and we were working to be able to do something by that deadline. But the details of what we were doing we felt we couldn't speak to. I'm happy to defer to Eric or Adam if they'd like to say more.
No, Scott, I think you covered it fairly well.
Yeah, thanks, Scott.
All right, let's go to Megan.
I guess I'm having some camera difficulties today. So first, I just wanted to say thanks very much for this excellent presentation and for kind of going through the background of how we arrived at where we are. I have taken some time to read the initial documents, and though not discussed in your presentations, I was wondering if you have any thoughts on what the anticipated stakeholder outreach for input on the actual kind of settlement and any terms of the purchase and sale agreement might look like.
Yeah, I don't think I'll take the first stab at this one, Scott. I don't think we exactly know how we're going to obtain that public outreach as far as on the settlement. There are certainly ideas floating around, and we are hopeful to have discussions with stakeholders here and our partners with CalTrout, Trout Unlimited, and Humboldt County and others, NIMS and CDFW on how they all feel is the best way to get that stakeholder engagement. As far as on the purchase and sale agreement, that's going to be something that the regional entity, when it's formed, is going to be dealing with the PG&E. That's not something that I would envision stakeholder outreach being involved or public input being involved on a bilateral negotiation between PG&E and the regional entity.
Understood. Just as a quick follow-up, I'd just like to request that you consider, at least providing updates on what those negotiations look like in this venue. A lot of us have dedicated a lot of time and energy to participating in the Russian River Water Forum and identifying and participating in yet another venue related to this specific process when we're already, some of us at about 10 hours, 20 hours a month of participation. It just, that time does add up. And I think it's a little bit of a burden on many of those here. And so I would just request that I understand that negotiations are confidential. So just to the extent that updates can be provided here so that the rest of us are apprised, especially those with interests in this proceeding. And it would be great if we could find a way to make this a useful space for participation in that stakeholder outreach.
Thanks, Megan. That is an appreciated comment, and I think many would agree with you. Let's find a way to make it efficient and share as best as we can. Let's go to Anna Farport. Hi, Anna.
Hi, I just have a question. I was wondering if you could go into more detail about the two design options and how they would incorporate fish passage.
You've got three lawyers here presenting. I don't know that you want any of us trying to play engineer at the moment. I'm not sure. I can only see 5 people on here right now, and none of those are engineers. So I'm not sure if there's anyone on that's more equipped to answer that question, but you certainly don't want to hear my engineering skills. They're not good.
Ben, this is Grant Davis. I'm not able as well, but maybe I can at least frame this better for Anna. There are 2 proposals that are currently being evaluated by the consultant team at Macmillan, very capable. And I see that Dave Manning has actually joined us. So I think Dave actually is probably best equipped to describe the process by which those evaluations are taking place that have included commentary to the appropriate way from the fish agencies, as well as a technical team that Dave, you can name some of the individuals involved there. But as was mentioned earlier by Scott, we got such good feedback from CalTrout, Trout Unlimited, and many of the folks that are engaged in this about that third alternative, that was perceived as an upgrade of fish ladder with the existing facility. Strong indications that that was not going to happen. Congressman Huffman and others weighed in, but certainly it was the conservation agencies that just said, please don't advance that. And so that fell out of the ultimate draft proposal. So we're down to these two, and we'll let Dave talk about what those are like and how they are being conceived. They were only mentioned earlier. So Dave, do you want to take it from here?
Sure. Yeah. And I think there's some good reference material. I'm David Manning, Environmental Resources Manager, Sonoma Water. At one of the working group meetings, Don Seymour and I gave some background information about the plans that have been developed to date, including some of the products of the feasibility studies that were conducted by the Two Basin Partnership. And I think that's a good reference piece of material. And I'm sure Ben and his colleagues can point folks to that. That presentation has several slides that describe the 4 alternatives that resulted from those earlier studies. The 2 that we are moving forward are the ones that were mentioned in the presentation today. They're both involve removal of the dam, the gravity portion of the dam, one with a pump station and the other with a roughened channel. So one relies on sort of mechanically pumping the water up the tunnel. The other allows a gravity to feed the diversion entirely. Those 2 designs are in development right now. We have a consultant who's very excellently qualified to do this work, same consultant that has been part of the development of those preliminary concepts. And we have a technical team that comprises representatives from National Marine Fisheries Service, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, CalTrout, Sonoma Water, Mendocino Inland Water and Power, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. There are more than 20 members, and that consultant shares those products as they're being developed. And there's a lot of new work that's being done to model the hydraulics so that the conditions under which diversions can be made and the fish passage conditions themselves, the depths, the velocities can really be vetted for both of those alternatives. So we're in the throes of that work right now. And we hope to make substantial progress on it by the fall, and if not the fall, the spring of next year. I hope that's somewhat helpful.
Ben, can I just add one quick comment to supplement what Grant and David said? I just want to make sure that no one feels that we've misled anyone by talking about the 2 and not the third. The proposal does not include the third alternative, the dam remaining with a fish ladder. That is very clear. Sonoma, in advancing 30% designs, is under contract with the Department of Water Resources and is required to complete analysis on that third alternative up to 30% plans and specs. And so I just wouldn't want anyone to take from this conversation that work that Sonoma is doing does not include the third one, because they're contractually obligated to the Department of Water Resources to finish it. But the commitment in the proposal to PG&E is that it'll only be one of the 2. And I didn't want someone to see that final report and wonder why there's still a third in there. That's why there's still a third in there, because they're under contract to complete it.
Thanks, Scott. Okay, just a few notes, and then I see a few hands. First is that for anyone who has not had the chance to see the proposal, Henry did put it in the chat, the link and the PDF itself, so you can get it there if that's useful. And then we're going to put a link in the chat soon to the presentation that Dave had mentioned. So Henry's tracking that down, and we'll put that in there soon. Okay, let's go to Alicia.
First, I just want to say, Scott, thanks for that clarification. That is, I think, a really important point for people to be aware of, that, Sonoma Water is still going to take that third option to 30%, but it's not a part of this proposal. So I appreciate that clarification. And speaking of contracts and agreements, I was wondering if anyone can speak to the nature of any kind of like MOU or contract that the 3 entities who put forth the proposal have with each other. I understand that probably that's confidential, but given that there's some public agencies involved here, yeah, I was just curious if you can share the nature of any kind of agreement that the 3 entities have. Thanks.
I think the only agreements we have are the planning agreement, which also included Cal Trout and Trout Unlimited. I'm not-
Oh, okay, so this proposal, like the three groups that are working together are working under that original agreement from the Two Basin Partnership?
I'm not, I don't know that I would characterize it as that same, because the intent of that was to relicense the facility, and clearly that's not happening under a power license. So I think that I would say that that's fairly obsolete at this point in time. I'm just saying I'm struggling to think of any other agreements that the three of us have at this moment in time.
Sorry to interject, I just want to clarify that Trout Unlimited is actually not a signatory to the planning agreement.
Did I say Trout Unlimited?
You said both of us. It's just Cal Trout.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I meant, excuse me.
No,
you're
no
right.
worries. I just wanted to be, yeah, just
Yes.
wanted to be clear.
My mistake, Humboldt County and California Trout.
Yeah, and I agree with Adam. I'm not aware of any agreement currently between the three entities. That doesn't mean there won't be one in the future, but right now there isn't.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, echo, just confirming my understanding of the same.
Okay, let's go to Kathy, and then I do see a couple of questions in the chat, and I can tee those up as well. So go ahead, Kathy.
So when I read over the options, it seems like they really can't move forward without Scott's Dam being taken down first because of the sediment that might have to flow out of Scott's Dam and clearing it. So it seems like there needs to be some kind of an agreement with PG&E on the coordination of what these options and moving forward would need to be, what PG&E's plans are for removal of Scott's Dam.
You're absolutely right. That would be an agreement, a term most likely in the purchase and sale agreement between the regional entity and PG&E, but coordination of removal of Scott Dam and removal of whatever portions of Cape Horn Dam need to come out, depending on which diversion facility is selected, will be vitally important.
Which means that it's going to be a long time happening before any of this actually functions.
I'll agree with Adam and add that as the three lawyers presenting, we're not equipped to advise the order in which facilities should come out. But figuring out that order is part of the discussions that will now occur with PG&E. And the commitment that we've made as the three who have come to this proposal is to not slow down PG&E's timeline to get to a FERC order to get this implemented. The order of facilities coming out is something we don't know at this point, and it really requires completion of a design for the initial, for the diversion structure to know what the order in which things should happen. And that is what we will work on PG&E with.
Great.
Hey, I'm just noting in the chat a question from Carol from Lake Pillsbury Alliance. And Carol, do you want to, if you can, do you want to ask the question yourself?
Sure. I am just curious, a point of clarification. I thought I heard that the initial draft surrender and decommissioning plan will not be a formal FERC filing. So unless it's filed or with FERC as an informational item, how will stakeholders be assured that they will have an opportunity to see it and comment on it?
My understanding is that it's not filed at FERC as an informational item or not, but again, not a FERC lawyer here. I'm not sure if Richard Roos Collins is on and could answer that. And sorry, but I really can't speak for how PG&E intends to do its outreach to receive stakeholder comment on that. We don't have that kind of information.
Dan, I think there was a previous presentation made to the Planning Commission that talked about, the planning group that talked about the overall schedule, and perhaps it's something you can find a link to, because I think there was a slide that talked about PG&E coming out this November with a draft to the public, which it would receive comment from the public on, and then coming out with an updated draft next November or summer or somewhere around there, that it again and would receive comment on, and then it would formally file with FERC in January of 2025.
I think the issue really is that by the time it files in 2025, it will be pretty much a done deal and in terms of how it's all shaped. And there are a lot of stakeholders, I'm convinced, that would like to have some influence into that initial draft, or at least the second draft, because they're for a variety of reasons, obviously.
Yeah, my understanding is the second draft in May is filed with FERC. And then the final is complete in January. That's the final complete surrender application. But again, PG&E would have to be the one to answer how they intend to get stakeholder outreach and comment on that. We don't have that information.
Thank you.
Mike, did you have a response to that or a separate question?
Yeah, no, I just, my understanding is that the what's coming out in November is, I think PG&E is referring to that as an initial draft application, and the intent of that is to receive stakeholder input and then to consider that input into their, and then they will be submitting a May 2024 draft surrender application to FERC. So in summary, the initial draft surrender application that comes out in November is for stakeholder comment, and their intent, I think, from what they've said in their schedule from a couple of years ago, is that they'll incorporate or address those comments in in what they send to FERC in May of 2024.
And yeah, to Scott's point, that schedule is something that we can share out and certainly revisit in future meetings, so we can get a little bit more specific about what's coming up and what the milestones are. I see a question from Bree, and Bree, feel free to ask it if you can get off mute, or I can do it as well. I'll just ask. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just wondering if there's been any response at all from PG&E regarding the proposal, and if not, is there any idea what sort of time frame we can expect? Will we hear something from them before they submit the initial draft?
PG&E has not told us whether they will include this in their proposal. We have not had an official communication to that. PG&E has indicated that it will start negotiating with the regional entity when the regional entity is formed. Until that time, we hope to have further informal discussions with PG&E to learn more.
But does that mean that they will engage in discussions with an entity if we form one?
They haven't indicated a time frame for making a decision on the proposal that we have submitted, and they haven't given us an answer yet.
Oh, okay, thanks.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions from planning group members.
Ben? Dennis here.
Hi, Dennis. You're gonna have to help me out here, Dennis, and remind me if you're a member of the planning group.
Yeah, I thought I changed it. Okay, I'm a planning group member. I had a question about the motions to intervene that have been filed. How do those affect the process moving forward?
Go ahead, Erica.
Yeah, I can take a stab at that. It's pretty complicated because even though we have the Potter Valley project, there are a lot of different proceedings happening at once. There's the decommissioning proceeding, but there are also many other proceedings, including the drought variance and those other processes. And the way, my understanding is the way FERC rules work is that oftentimes parties will have to intervene on different types of proceedings, even though it's all related to the same project. So for those folks who are on the FERC sort of notice, you get, you know, different information about parties intervening on different projects. So my understanding is that you know, this is all sort of concurrently happening. PG&E still has their annual license and they have to abide by that license while they're working on their decommissioning plan. So my understanding is I don't see the various interventions and things like that impacting this process as PG&E moves forward with their decommissioning plan. So Adam, I don't know if you have anything to add to that, but.
No, I'd agree with it. I don't think it impacts it at all. There's also the license transfer to the Pacific Generation Corporate is another sub proceeding is the right word, but my understanding is that intervention really just gives somebody the opportunity to appeal if they don't like the decision that FERC issues. That's the difference between that and just filing a comment, but that's just my limited understanding.
Matt, did you have another question?
Yeah, one more thing. I think Scott or someone might have covered this a minute ago, but I just wanted to confirm, but for the three parties, like your commitment is to do all this with the regional entity, et cetera, and you know, finding a final design, et cetera, on a schedule that does not interfere with PG&E's current decommissioning schedule to FERC, right? That's a commitment that y'all are making?
That's the commitment.
What I said is we are committed to not slow down PG&E in its schedule that it is submitted to FERC to get to the decommissioning process, the decommissioning hearing.
Okay, so the schedule, in other words, to get to a proposed decommissioning plan by January 2025.
Correct.
Past that, you're not saying, but up to that point, you're going to do all this. You're going to let them file something in January 2025.
Yes, and the only reason for my nuance, and I might as well just be straight with it,
Sure.
was the point that Carol raised, which is, well, what's the order of things? And the order of things could make something happen faster or slower. We just don't know.
Yeah.
And the science is going to control the order of things, but we are making sure that we don't slow anything down to get to that January date.
To get to that point, yeah, but I mean, that's, you know, the nuance on this side too, is the concern of this whole thing is just the, you know, potential to slow down the project writ large. I mean, that's obviously something we're pretty concerned about.
Understood.
Thanks. Yeah, likewise.
Okay, let's go to Vivian, and then I'm going to suggest we move on from there. I want to make sure we have time for discussion among the planning group for next steps here, but go ahead, Vivian.
How do you see the potential transfer of PG&E's Powder Valley project assets to Pacific Generation affecting the negotiations of the regional entity with the project?
I'll take a stab at that one. I don't see it would if the license transfer happens before there's a purchase and sale agreement. My take would be that, you know, Pacific Generation is still going to be a subsidiary or owned and controlled by PG&E. It might be a contract with Pacific Generation instead of PG&E Corp, but my understanding is the same staff and PG&E is still going to control it. So it's just an avenue to raise capital. But I don't think it would impact the ability to negotiate a purchase and sale agreement. I don't know if Scott or Erica, you think differently, but that's my take.
Agreed.
Okay, Megan, go ahead. Last one.
Sorry, just wanted to follow up on something Adam mentioned. Adam, if you guys could just dig in on and confirm your understanding that entering into an agreement with PG&E wouldn't have an impact on Pacific Generation's honoring of that commitment. I think it would provide solace to a lot of us who are engaged in the CPUC proceedings. I seem to recall that in that venue, PG&E has provided some level of information regarding the contracts that it will continue to honor going forward. And I can't specifically recall, because it's been a while since I've looked at them, whether they are listed out as individuals and therefore the addition of another would be problematic, or if it's just generally in any place that there is some kind of an assumption provision in a contract that Pacific Generation would assume PG&E's role going forward.
I haven't reviewed those CPUC proceedings, so I can't speak intelligently on what was in there. All I can say is what my limited understanding is that whatever is transferred to Pacific Generation will continue to be, that the contracts would likely be assigned to Pacific Generation. They would probably be, you know, assigned and assumed, and then therefore they stand in the shoes of PG&E Corp. You know, there's two corporations right now, and I just recall that from the bankruptcy. There's PG&E Corp, and then there's another PG&E. So I think this would just be a third PG&E corporation, but I can't speak to what PG&E will honor and won't honor. I just, in negotiating the regional entity, I don't think there will be an impact to the regional entity's ability to negotiate a purchase and sale agreement if that license transfer occurs before that happens. That's about all I can speak to.
Okay. Thank you, Adam, and thank you again to Adam, Erica, and Scott for sharing this information, and for the planning group members, great questions here. So I'm going to suggest we move on, and this is really, if we can pull up the slides, Henry, and maybe I'll try to set the table here a little bit. Let's go to the next slide. Right. So this is where, you know, given the sort of the information we've received, how the planning group wants to move forward. And I think it's just recognizing that there are, you know, in thinking about, you know, kind of like a timeline, there are multiple swim lanes that we're trying to figure out, you know, Scott alluded to earlier, is like, where are the connection points? Where are the connection points between this planning group and the proponents of the proposal? And how will there be interaction and input going back and forward? How does this relate to PG&E and PG&E's FERC decommissioning process? So there's sort of a, you know, the context now is updated. And so we're really interested in getting everyone's thoughts and sort of recommendations for how we want to proceed forward. So let's go to the next slide. And this is just sort of what the facilitation team is putting together is some initial ideas, and just sort of here's where we are in time. So a proposal has been submitted to PG&E, and you know, our sense is there's still you know, an opportunity for the planning group to really help refine those details of the proposal. As Scott had kind of noted, it's a foot in the door, and there are still some things to figure out. And I think that what's important to recognize is that the proponents are going to be asking for input in certain areas and not other areas. And so I think what's important is we're all very clear on what those areas are, what the kind of decision-making input space is. And I don't think that's all figured out yet, but I think it's important that everyone's on the same page. And so that's something we all need to work on a little bit together to make sure everyone's clear and we've got, you know, expectations set. A few things that, as we've been sort of looking at the overall structure of the planning group and the sort of the direction of the working group discussions, a couple areas where the facilitators see opportunity for the planning group to really help out in the process moving forward, and to make sure that your interests are represented. In terms of financing, it still needs to be determined how much the water users are going to pay for the O&M of the future diversion. And so that's something where there's an opportunity for that financing work group to help drill down on that. And then there's a capital improvements piece as well. And there's, you know, there needs to be a strategy developed for that. So I think that's something the planning group can contribute to. On the water rights side, and we have the co-chairs from that group are going to talk a little bit about where they are now. It's really, there's a lot of, I think, information sharing that could be beneficial here around what are the implications to water rights holders, and just sharing information so kind of everyone knows how the landscape will be shifting. On the governance side, there's a longer term regional entity piece where the proponents might be looking for input. And so that's something that the planning group can contribute to. And then just building on our planning group meeting in July, to continue the conversation around resilience. So it's more of a longer term conversation, or how we can reduce demand and perhaps over time, kind of wean the region off the diversion. So these are just some examples, and there could be more, but want to just highlight that we still see some real benefit and opportunity for the planning group to interact with the proponents here to flesh out this proposal and hopefully have your interests reflected as best as possible, in what's ultimately going to be pulled together. So let's go to the next slide. So what we like to do is do a little bit of, we did this in our previous planning group meeting that we did virtually. We have some questions that we want to get the planning group's input on to really help us sort of define how we want to prioritize discussion topics moving forward, what folks really want to get out of this process, considering where we are in time. And what we're going to do is similar to the last meeting, is do a Miro board exercise. And so we can sort of pull that up in a second. But the questions we want to ask you are first, how can we, I think you all recall in the first couple of meetings, we really focused on underlying interests, and we made the distinction between interests and positions. We want to understand how your underlying interests can be best addressed in the process moving forward. So what are the things we need to be keeping in mind to make sure that we're addressing them as best as possible? So that's the first question. The second question is, what recommendations do you have or requests do you have for the planning group process? So from where we go from here, what do you think is important to be keeping in mind? We talked about keys to success before, and there might be sort of some updated thinking on that, given again where we are in time. And the third question is, I think that the proposal proponents are trying to figure out, and the planning group members are trying to figure out, what is the mechanism to have coordination and collaboration moving forward. And so it'd be helpful to understand, well, what expectations do you have? What requests do you have of the proponents? And we'll see, the extent to which that can be accommodated, but it'd be good to start fleshing that out. And I think it's going to take a little time to figure out how we make this communication channel as productive as possible, but it'd be good to get some initial thoughts. So let's go to the Miro board. And I believe, let's see, I think, Henry, can you put the link to the Miro board in the chat? Okay, so for planning, and we're going to request, similar to the rest of the meeting, we're going to request that we just have planning group members open this up and provide their feedback where everyone's going to be able to see it. But what we'd like to do is, if we could pull up the Miro board and ask the planning group members to open it up, the link on your end. And so, Henry, if we can share the Miro board on our screen here. Okay. So again, in order to write on it, you got to click on it on your end. You can zoom in on it. And then just click on it on a blank sticky note, and you can type away. If we run out of sticky notes, we can create more. But feel free to go in there. We're going to give you all about 7 or 8 minutes to go in and answer your questions, or answer the questions. And then what we'll do is take the rest of the time we have on this agenda topic just to kind of go through them and identify themes and kind of discuss from there. So I'd say, let's let the planning group members take a little time to fill this out. In the meantime, others can, happy to follow along or take a break. And then I think we'll probably start the discussion around, again, like 7 or 8 minutes. So we'll just sort of leave you to it. And maybe you can zoom in just a little bit, Henry, so folks can see it. So I maybe make the text smaller on the top, and then so folks can see the text of the sticky notes, because it's a little small. Okay, maybe take 1 or 2 more minutes and then we can kind of tee it up here. Okay, so let's, and folks are welcome to keep writing here, but I think I'll get started. And what I'm going to ask Henry to do is, can you zoom in on the first 2? And maybe we could talk about the first 2 at once, and then we can go to the third. Just observing, seeing some overlapping thoughts here across the 2 of them. So I was just going to offer some observations around some common themes, and then open it up and see what, if anyone would like to elaborate on it. But I think we're certainly seeing the interest and the need for transparency here on what's going on, what is being asked of the planning group, and how the planning group can stay up to speed, and the general public, I think, can stay up to speed on what's going on with the new facility proposal. And so I think there's kind of a question of, again, how do we make sure that there's open communication to the extent that things can be shared, and that communication process is efficient and it's clear. So that I'm kind of seeing that in a couple different places, and just the need for regular updates, and then having clear direction that goes to the different working groups and subgroups that can help move things forward. Certainly hearing some sensitivity around statements being clear, sort of identified as consensus or agreement, and I appreciate that. And so I think that's something that we as facilitators can really make sure we're getting that before we sort of make that observation. So we do appreciate that comment. Yeah, maybe I'll just leave it. This isn't exhaustive, so I'm not gonna say everything. Certainly seeing some comments around tribal participation, and wanting to make sure that the tribes are involved in sort of future design discussions, and helping provide input. But maybe I'll just see if anyone, any planning group members have observations here around what you're seeing or not seeing, that we can kind of think about in terms of moving forward. Matt?
Yeah, I'll just go ahead and talk here. I didn't fill this out, and I just want to say, just in the interest of transparency, I want to be really upfront about this general comment, because we've had a lot of discussions about this in my group, internally in my organization, and with some of our partners. Obviously, I won't speak for any of them, but we're just really, I think, have deeper concerns about this process and that what's been done here to date. To be sitting here, then we can kind of capture and going through like little post-it notes here, et cetera. And we're, just to be frank, really reconsidering our participation in this forum. I mean, there's a lot of things that have to come together if this is going to work over the next year. And, there's kind of been this desire to form this group and kind of work in good faith with a broad and get broad buy-in from a range of parties. But what we've seen is like kind of the opposite of that, right? We've seen kind of a reluctance to share information. And what we don't what we're worried about, we got some real concerns, not about this, that's not just about the substance of this proposal, but just about the process this sets up. And as we look down the line, we're just skeptical that, you know, you see concerns here about transparency in the notes on the screen, but we're really skeptical about what's going to be different going forward. Because the process is set up, you know, there's going to be a series of, you're going to have the current 3 groups, so that's going to be a JPA after that, and after that's going to be maybe a regional entity. And they're all going to have their own NDAs with PG&E, right? And so none of the folks here, we're not going to be at the table. We're not going to, you know, all the hard things we've got to go through together and get agreement on. We're not going to be at that table. And I appreciate that, you know, as you said several times, they'll share information where it can be done, but you know, we don't know when that is. There's going to be a lot of things that can't be shared. And we're just skeptical about the ability of that process to reach the kind of broad consensus and buy-in with all the parties in these 2 basins that needs to happen on the timeline that it needs to happen to get these dams out on an expeditious schedule, which is our number1 priority for fish and the eel. And what we've seen so far with this process does not inspire confidence in the ability to do that. And as was said, you know, by American Rivers earlier from Megan, I mean, the time in this process really does add up. It's a big investment of time from a lot of folks, and we certainly will remain interested and, you know, be very much part of reaching some kind of, you know, whatever happens to the fate of this project over the next year on the eel. But whether it's done through this process or not, we're just not sure this is the way to do it. And I just feel the need to say that up front and clearly, because I don't want that to be a surprise to anybody. And yeah, I understand these parties are kind of doing what they think it's nothing, they're representing their interests and kind of doing what they think they have to do. But as far as getting broad consensus, I'm just not sure we see it. And so I just want to make that clear. I don't know what we'll do ultimately. I think there's some more discussions on that, but I just want to at least send up a flare that we're having those thoughts and having those discussions internally. And I'll leave it there for now. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Matt. John?
Yeah, Matt, I hear your concerns. I mean, I see the difficulty, but we're dealing with a you know, PG&E, capitalist interest. They have rules, and what, you know, I would love to sit there and listen to PG&E's negotiations, but I don't have standing, and unfortunately, you know, Drought Unlimited doesn't have standing. But what would be an alternative? How would you stay with this group and be able to get the information you need and not violate those non-disclosure agreements?
We would have expressed great concerns with the process set up by this proposal. We would have tried to influence those if we'd known they were going into PG&E, you know, with the idea of heading off a train wreck, which is what we have now, because we've got a proposal on the table that's, you know, now the whole forum is about how to move with that forward, right? And it's got things that fundamentally are a problem for us in there. And so we would have tried to head that off if we had gotten a heads up initially, which wouldn't require, you know, violating anyone's NDA or not being there, you know, wouldn't require us being at the table for negotiations with PG&E, but it would have an understanding about what was being taken in there. And by the way, this isn't just us. I mean, there's a broad range of groups on all sides of this that didn't have a heads up on this. And I know we're not the only ones that are, you know, making these, you know, these observations here. And so, you know, that's the issue. I mean, I don't know how to say it more clearly than that.
John, do you have any other thoughts, or is it mainly the?
I understand how the process is going, and I understand there's a bunch of different little pieces here and big pieces, huge pieces. And you know, I felt coming forward, showing us what the proposal was, explaining the proposal. I felt as if you know, that information came as timely as it could, based upon the restrictions that were placed upon the negotiating parties by negotiating with the private public entity that is PG&E. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Let's go to Alicia and then Vivian.
Yeah, so just
Riffing off of Matt's comments, I'm wondering, my understanding is that Sonoma Water was unable to secure additional funding for this forum. And so I'm just wondering what does this process look like going forward? You know, how are we all going to continue talking about this, and how's that going to be facilitated or organized? Thank you.
Is that something that Mike Thompson or Grant can talk to?
Yeah, Ben, I can. Yeah, and Alicia, while we didn't receive the grant, the County of Sonoma has committed $350,000 to continue the work of the forum, and Sonoma County Water Agency's water contractors have so far also committed another $150,000, and that should allow this forum to continue on at least through late winter, early spring of next year.
Thank you.
Okay, let's go to Vivian.
So we've been participating in this process, and it seems to be going forward with the assumption that there will be a diversion. There's a great deal of investment in, setting up a facility and an entity and a water right to do that. And that seems to be more the focus. We've been having these ongoing conversations in the here as if we were going to try to put together some kind of a broad agreement that we could give to PG&E. And meanwhile, the groups with the strongest interest in their desire or need for that water to be diverted have gone ahead without us, and without us knowing what they were doing, though, we've been skeptical all along. And so it just seems like we were diverted, so to speak, into this conversation where a lot of people didn't have the background or, not working on the same set of information that we developed over the last several years, and trying to bring everybody up to speed. Meanwhile, negotiations were happening outside of this process that we have not been part of. And then in the press release about this proposal, it was presented to the public as we used, information that we gathered from talking with these other groups, but it made it seem like we were part of the conversation when we actually weren't. And as we've gone along, we've had to counter assumptions all along about this diversion. I want to remind you that when the releases from Lake Pillsbury were limited so that the needle valve wouldn't plug up, the water that was released was kept in the River of Origin. And the River of Origin should take precedence in the conversation about how those fisheries will be maintained. I see, some allowance or, new, recognition of the need for a harvestable surplus for the Round Valley tribe. I don't know if that includes, a conversation about the huge economic sport fishery and commercial fishery that relied on the fish from this river, and the great economic losses that have occurred from those fisheries going down. I don't know if this is going to be enough. I don't know if this forum is going to help us get where we need to go. And I don't know if this proposal is going to help us get where we need to go. And I don't know if it's going to help the proponents get where they want to go either. I know it's a fair attempt under pressure and under circumstances. I don't see how we'll be able to influence those negotiations going forward through participation in this group. We might get information after the fact, like we've been doing. And I have a lot of concerns about continuing participation in this group.
Vivian, Mike?
Yeah, I just had a quick question back to one of Matt Clifford's comments where he talked where with regard that there are fundamental problems in the proposal that was described earlier. And I was just wondering if you could provide a little bit of information on that, what he sees the fundamental problems are.
It sets up the negotiating entities early on in the process and kind of kicks a can on all the hard issues down the road, right? So we're going to have a JPA and then maybe a regional entity that's kind of going to step into the shoes and take on a life of their own and becoming a negotiating entity. And I don't have any confidence that, you know, they're going to provide transparency to this group they're trying to get buy-in from, that we're going to, you know, be kept in the loop and have a, you know, a place in those negotiations and discussions. And I haven't seen, certainly from what we've seen so far in the last couple of weeks, that doesn't lend further confidence to me that we're going to have transparency about communication with this group. And it's nothing, I hate to say this to people, but that's just what we've seen, right? And so it's going to, you know, there's a lot of hard things that have to be agreed upon for this to work out in the way they want. And the way it's kind of being front loaded here just looks like it's headed for a train wreck to me. I would much prefer to get agreement on those hard things up front, and then let's put together and figure out as a group, not a subgroup, but as a group, okay, what kind of institutional framework do we have to put in place to get those things done on the timeline we need to get it done for? But the way this is proceeding, it's just, you know, creating a process up front, and the whole thing now again becomes how do we push forward that process that, you know, a small subset put on the table. Those are our concerns, and that's what we would have said if we had been able to have input into this. Is just, let's not do things backwards.
Okay, thank you.
Nicole, I see your hand.
Yeah, you know, I'm listening into these conversations and I feel the opposite. I feel like when I came into this was invited to this forum, like I felt like everything was completely already aligned to where it's going now today. So I'm a tribal member, you know, of Brown Valley, and I don't agree with the diversions. I clearly do not agree. I stand with my with Save California Salmon and in opposition of the diversions, but I am also extremely supportive of what my tribal council chooses to do and work on as a project. And you know, it's kind of difficult to sit here and hear. I've sat in all of these meetings and heard, you know, so who's going to do a proposal? Nobody's done a proposal yet. Who's going to do it? And now that one is here, it's like, why did they do that? What, you know, and it's just kind of repetitive because it, to me, being the short time that I've been in working in these projects, it's always been clear to me that the idea from the two basin solution moving forward was always about a diversion. And I've always known that I've been on the opposition, again, always supportive of my tribal council and a tribal member ability to voice them. I don't agree with the diversion. So I don't feel like we're being blindsided in any way. I appreciate this time in this forum to be able to speak and have these things, but I too was kind of concerned about, okay, now that there's a proposal, if it is accepted, which we were told today that it hasn't been, or there's no information yet, you know, where will this group go and how do we fit in? So I just wanted to make.
Thanks, Nicole. John, I see your hand.
Yeah, I'm looking at the proposal and looking at the Ruffin Channel section of it. And I'm seeing that the low flow section crest is at 1,470 feet. And and I'm looking at the weir construction at 1,477 feet. It looks as if this whole design is to allow for high flows and not diversions during low flow. Is that correct?
Mike, is that a question you can answer, or Dave?
Yeah, I can, but I think it'd be better for Dave.
It allows for, the design is to allow for a full range of diversions, whatever those criteria are established to be. It's not limited to only high flow.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
So essentially what you're saying is that, this proposal is trying to take into consideration any eventual agreement which will come down the road, and that without this proposal, there can be no agreement which includes any type of diversion, whether that's, a minor amount during the summers or high amounts during high winter flows for storage, that, without going forward with PG&E and doing this proposal, that PG&E would just take all this stuff out, and there would be no capacity in the future to be able to come up with any solution, which involves the two basins. Is that correct?
I don't
Yeah.
think,
John, yeah, just with regard to that, and I think Scott and Adam and Erica all said this, that this if you want, the proposal that was put in, it is intended to essentially keep the foot in the door. There's still, and I think Glenn McGordy said this as well, that there's a lot of work still to do, and this was what was put in was a way to keep that door open, to preserve the opportunity for an ongoing diversion, and that there's still a lot of work to be done. And that I think we've also heard, and I think I've said it a few times, is that the intent is of all this is that I think there's a common interest to have fish passage as soon as possible, to have reliable water supply as soon as possible. And from what it's been inferred from PG&E, they would like to have this resolved as soon as possible. So I think the intent on all of this is, and as was said earlier, is not to slow PG&E's process down, and to move forward as quickly as possible. And again, John, back to your point that what has been put in and what's been said already, I'd just like to reemphasize it's essentially it's a doorstop. It's keeping the door open for potentially maintaining this diversion, and there's still a lot of work to be done.
And in the future, that diversion doesn't necessarily mean the status quo as it is today. I mean, there's still plenty of opportunity for discussion of all the fishery needs in the Eel River, and how that's going to look in the future. This was a part that was required to allow, the way I see it is that this proposal and going forward with the proposal was part and parcel of just keeping this conversation alive, because without this proposal, there's no option for a two-basin solution. And thank you for your work. Appreciate it.
Okay, thanks, John. Let's go to Matt, and then I do want to move us on to the next agenda item soon. So go ahead, Matt.
yeah, that's fine. I just want to say, I just don't think that's right. I don't think it's right that there's no option moving forward without this proposal. I mean, it's not a given that this has to take place even as part of the FERC process, right? We've got a decommissioning schedule now. PG&E can come in, they're going to remove, express a desire to remove everything from the river. But there are alternatives here that allow for a continued diversion after that, right? And there's no reason we can't proceed in a way that allows PG&E to carry out, kind of its announced intentions. And the question is, how do we build a diversion after that? And so the kind of that, idea that this is the one shot, or this is, to create that urgency around that, I just don't think is correct.
Okay, Janet, I see your hand, and then Megan.
Yeah, just really quickly, I want to address what Matt just said. We were not under the impression that there was an alternative to what we did. We believe that the discussion with PG&E needed to be on their terms, and their timeline. We also believe that there's nothing in our proposal that's at odds with the goal of attaining the two-basin solution as we understood it. And those goals continue to be water supply certainty and fish passage. I really believe that moving forward, and we'll have to find a way to engage with stakeholders and agencies on this. I mean, we've been attempting to do that, particularly with the agencies at this point. But if we get support from stakeholders and the agencies, the faster the process will move forward, assuming PG&E accepts the proposal that they currently have in front of them.
Yeah, I'm sorry to jump back in here. I'm going to try to, but I just think this is important. I'll be brief. I know we want to move on, but I understand. I think we're talking past each other a little bit here. As far as the PG&E had a deadline, that's true. There was some urgency about putting some kind of proposal in by that deadline to be included in the draft plan. There was not a need, to be I've said my piece on this, but there was not a need to be secretive about that, or just not to include a broader range of voices in that way. And certainly as far as there's not a need to do this as part of a final, one project, so the surrender order. There's ability to, again, allow PG&E to do what it says it wants to do and take these facilities out. And there can be a discussion about how we have a continued diversion that would be constructed after that. And I understand the concerns about deadline, about urgency here, but I just, there's different deadlines we're talking about. I'll leave it there. Thanks.
Thanks, Matt. Okay, let's go to Megan and then Anna, and then I'm gonna try to move us on after that.
So first, Janet, I really appreciate your comments, especially your highlighting that you've already been in consultation with some of the agencies. My question is around kind of just collecting the diverse perspectives and issues that we've been hearing today. I'm like, I have the proposal open along with its timeline. I noticed that you have a fairly quick turnaround to try to, report back on the reaction of stakeholders by October 31st. And I share concerns about the timeline that others have raised. And is there a way that we can kind of list out, make sure there is kind of a thorough documentation of the various issues and ideas that those participating in this venue are bringing to the table, so that we can start to brainstorm actual solutions? Because it looks like also your goal would be to convene some kind of a settlement table by October. I personally am very supportive of this expedited timeline, because I agree with others on this call that restoring the fisheries and fish passage in the fastest means possible is an admirable goal, and one that I certainly support. And so I would, while I do have some concerns around the timing and the ironing out of details, in an effort to kind of move forward in a collaborative manner, I want to help you move forward quickly, but in a way that honors and collects the concerns that people are raising here.
Thanks, Megan. Okay, let's go to Anna and then Janet, and then I'm going to move us. I'll try to wrap us up, and then we do want to make sure we have time for kind of next steps and certainly public comment. So why don't you go ahead, Anna?
Thanks. One of the earlier slides stated that there's an opportunity for the planning group to refine the details of the proposal. So I think it would be super helpful to just kind of lay out how that would happen, how those details could be refined by this group. It might alleviate people's frustration at having the proposal being submitted without their knowledge. But if there is that opportunity, it would be great to know how that would function besides these little sticky notes. And also, more importantly than the details of the proposal, is also how people can have input on how a diversion would function. Like, for example, could it be limited to only high flow diversions?
Thanks, Anna. And to your point around where the group can weigh in. We're going to talk about that next. So I do want to make sure we get to that. And then I did want to just sort of mention back to Megan's comment around the deadline that's in the proposal for October 31st. And I would sort of pose that question. It doesn't have to be answered now to the proponents of how would you recommend really engaging this group to help, document the discussions that you're going to be documenting, because they've certainly been happening. I think there's a real opportunity here, and so I think that might be something to think about and come back to this group and come up with some ideas, because I think that it's part of your plan. Let's Janet, go ahead, and then I'll wrap us up here.
Yeah, Ben, I think you just basically hit the nail on the head in terms of what has to happen next. And I just want to thank Megan in particular for her willingness to work moving forward. And I think that's going to be the key here. Working with other stakeholders as we go forward, figuring out times and ways that we communicate the process that's underway. And I don't know that anyone has a clear answer to that right now, but it's something that we need to work on. And I'm happy to see that there are people in this group that are really willing to do that. I think it's critically important to success. And again, moving quickly, expeditiously forward in this process. And the timelines are set right now by PG&E and FERC. We need to move within them, and we don't have a lot of time. Anybody's suggestions are welcome as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. Okay. And thank you all for your comments here. I think this is going to be an ongoing conversation we have around the need for transparency, and just want to make sure that we're hearing the concerns we're hearing here, and certainly can appreciate that this is a commitment of time, and you all are busy, and that some are considering, whether your interests are best met staying in the group. And so my request to you would be, please have a conversation with the facilitators about that, so we know that, and hopefully we can help accommodate what your concerns are. But we appreciate the perspective that you're sharing. Our hope is that we can continue to work from a place of underlying interests in taking this framework of a proposal, and really adding some details that has hopefully the fingerprints of the planning group on it. And then in addition to that, I think beyond the Potter Valley project, there are other topics the Water Forum is really wanting to take on, and our plan is to continue those in parallel as well. So certainly more to discuss. What I will say is that the steering committee is meeting tomorrow. So we're going to try to unpack this discussion a little bit and come up with some thoughts and recommendations for how we can move forward. But please do keep in touch with us as we're sort of moving through the next steps. And we do want to make this as helpful and as transparent as we can possibly make it. Okay, so let's go to the next slides. I'm going to try to go through these pretty quickly, and then we do have a presentation, I think, from Dave Tabor on the water rights working group. So what we wanted to do is just provide a recap of the working group meetings that have happened since the last planning group, and a bit of a preview of what is likely going to be coming up with additional working groups, and then just give you a sense of the upcoming schedule. And again, Dave Tabor does have some slides he wants to present on the water rights working group sort of proposal that's been pulled together. So I'll try to move through mine quickly, and we'll hand it over to you, Dave. Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. And this is just a reminder of the org chart we have for the planning group, recognizing we've got a steering committee. The idea is still to pull together a leadership council. That hasn't happened yet. But there's a series of working groups and a resiliency subcommittee. And so we're kind of launching those as it seems timely, not doing them all at the same point in time. But just wanted to remind folks of the architecture we've got here. Let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, so there's been 2 working group meetings since the planning group meeting we had in July. The first is water supply and fisheries work group. And in that meeting, we identified co-chairs. So Sean White and Charlie Schneider are the co-chairs. We did have some discussions around Cape Horn Dam alternatives. And I think ultimately where we ended up is that the DWR study is largely going to determine the outcome of that, and to have conversations before the study is completed seem premature. So I think what the co-chairs had a conversation with the facilitation team, and ultimately we're recommending let's convene after that study is complete and we know what the information is available, and then we can kind of figure out where we go from there. Because I think we want to make it the best use of everyone's time. So that's the recommendation we have with water supply and fisheries for now. Let's go to the next slide. On water rights and water management. So the first meeting was held on the 25th of July. I think it was a really productive meeting, and Dave's going to talk a little bit more about it around a summary level analysis. And that group's actually meeting on Monday, the 21st. And so again, Dave will provide some more details. But they were able to make some good progress in the first meeting, and their intent is to continue meeting to do the work that Dave's going to talk about. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So what's coming up on the resiliency side? Just sort of a reminder that what we heard was broad support for the planning group, from the planning group, to convene the subcommittee in the near term, and that folks do want to talk about this. There's a need to understand what efforts are underway, and we got a good start with that with the last planning group meeting, and also understand where the data gaps are, and sort of contribute to some more precise water accounting to the extent that could happen. And just generally a shared interest in continuing to reduce demand and look towards the eventual sort of weaning of the basin off of the diversion, and have some sort of basin resiliency plan that has benchmarks in it, so we can sort of track as we go. And so that would be, it's a fair amount of work to do. I think folks are really interested in getting rolling. And so we'll be sort of, looking to schedule that meeting in September after Labor Day. So that's one thing that we would recommend moving forward. The next one is let's go to the next slide. Is finance and economics working group. And this has a little bit of nuance to it. So we're looking at this as having 2 participation tracks. And one is capital improvements. And that's sort of, and we think that that's sort of connected to both basins. It's going to require, I think, a strategy around that piece of it, and would need funding from different agencies. And we think that that's certainly a appropriate conversation to have, open, all members participating, sharing information, sharing ideas. When we get to the operations and maintenance piece, we think that it's at certain places, it's going to come down to the actual water users or suppliers who are going to be paying, having a discussion around how much they're going to be paying. And we think that it's appropriate to have some of those discussions in private, and then report out at a certain point when when there's some conclusions made. And so hopefully folks appreciate the need to do that. We certainly understand the need for transparency, and some of those discussions are going to happen in private. But we'll do our best to make the connection to the broader group that's tracking. So again, I think we're looking at starting those conversations at least in September. And we'll be kind of looking at the calendar and seeing when we think the information will be ready to bring to that group. Okay, so with that, I'm going to hand it over to you, Dave, to talk about the Water Rights and Water Management Working Group. So over to you.
Thank you very much. So I think the next slide, let's see what it has to say. Make sure we're working with the same presentation. Oh, okay. So what wasn't on the first slide is, so I'm one of the co-chairs of this working group. The other co-chair is Philip, who is a water rights and environmental attorney for the city of Ukiah. I run the Palomino Lakes Mutual Water Company. We're a water producer in the Upper Russian River. So what we're going to try to do is represent what's been going on in our working group, and we have a fundamental question for you at the end. So first off, we've had some technical briefings and a formal working group meeting. There's pretty good awareness and understanding of how the water rights work within our working group. Water rights law is really complicated. I don't even pretend to understand it. And the implications of actions go pretty quickly into deep areas of law. What we believe is that there's much weaker awareness in the other working groups. The water producers working group seems to have a pretty good understanding of things, but we're not clear that everyone else has a similar understanding. And we believe that what our working group needs to do is produce an impact analysis so everyone can understand what would happen without a diversion at all or with the diversion in place. For the Upper Russian River, there's 1,800 water rights that would be affected. That's pretty well, fortunately, that homework has already been done. Not entirely, but the excellent work of the Two Basin Solution, the homework they did over the years really pays off here, that we do understand pretty well what's going to go on there. For the Lower Russian River, there are thousands of water rights that are not well understood at all. You'd think it would all be in one place. You'd think that you could just go to a database and start doing some analyses. No, that's not the case. Likewise, in the Upper Eel, this is up until the Round Valley tribal area, there's around 850 water rights there. We don't believe that those water rights are very well cataloged either. So there's some homework that we've got to do to just collect all the information of who has what water rights and what's the seniority, what are the various privileges that they have. So to get this analysis done, we can't look at individual water rights. There's just too many of them. What we can do is work on categories of water rights because that's how the law prioritizes them. There's pre-1914 water rights, there's post-1914, there's post-1949, there's riparian, there's appropriative, and of course there's tribal water rights. Each of them have slightly different privileges and there's different impacts of various water flows on each of them. So what we would hope to do is be able to produce a summary level analysis showing for this group of water rights, here's going to be the impact of the way things have been versus a diversion versus no diversion. That is a surprisingly tall order because it's not just a matter of collecting information, but also doing some additional modeling and interpreting the modeling that the Two Basin Solution did. And so we're going to be needing to work closely with the folks at Cal Trout. They have some modeling that they're doing, and they have a pretty good understanding of the way the Eel River flows work in a way that we on the Russian River don't understand. So we're working pretty collaboratively to try to pull together this analysis. So that's kind of where we're going. Our goal is to provide the planning group and various outreach functions that we're going to need with the information to make these impacts clear. Because in general, the general public has very low awareness of all of this. And let's face it, a lot of the politicians don't have time to deep dive on any of this. So their understanding of who's going to be impacted and how is pretty limited. So we want to have things at a high enough level that this can be communicated simply. Next slide. So our proposal to you is that what we assemble is a presentation. Boy, it would be lovely to have it be less than 20 slides. I don't know that we can do that, but something on the order of 20 slides showing the implications of here's how things have been, here's what the diversion that has been proposed looks like, here's what the lack of diversion would look like. trying to keep it simple, but also accurate as much as we can. And in order to put that presentation together, the question we're going to be asking you is, what scenarios should we be looking at? We have a proposal for you, but we want to make sure that that proposal makes sense, and that we would deliver this presentation in a usable form before PG&E publishes their work, so that we're ready when we need to talk to the public, when we need to talk to the press, that we aren't just acting like we're uninformed. Of course, it won't be final then. There will, of course, be refinements as we get more time, but we think this tool is necessary for the planning group before any sort of public interaction is required. Our intention is so that we get a broad consensus. So you may oppose the diversion, you may blindly support the diversion, but making sure everyone understands the impact. We don't have a good understanding of that now. There's a lot of misinformation or simply wishful thinking about what those impacts would be. And I think we need to get down to a level of more concrete and a common understanding. That's what we think our goal is. Of course, you need to tell us if that goal is right. Next slide. So the scenarios that we think make the most sense. And the reason for choosing these is largely so we can capitalize on the work that was already done for the two basin solution. If we were to if we were to diverge significantly from either one of these, there's a lot more homework involved, and therefore we wouldn't be able to make as much progress as soon as we think we need to. So what we chose as scenario one was the key assumptions of what was called scenario 2 in the modeling that was done for the two basin solution. And what that assumes is that the dams are gone, but that there's a seasonal diversion. That is to say, during wet months in wet years, water is taken for the Russian River and fed through to Lake Mendocino. There is no assumption that Lake Mendocino changes in any way. It's simply trying to fill Lake Mendocino. There, of course, are proposals to increase the capacity of Lake Mendocino, but those have been in study for decades. They are not funded. And in fact, they wouldn't do a heck of a lot of good if there were no diversion, because there's not going to be anything to fill Lake Mendocino if there were no diversion. So we're using that as scenario one, and that's somehow this diversion is owned and operated by a regional entity, and that aligns fairly closely with what was put together for the PG&E fire drill. The scenario number 2 is no diversion whatsoever. And that's matches the assumptions of scenario 3, which essentially says the removal of everything. And our understanding is that the diversion would take approximately 2% of the Eel River flow, again, only in winter, in the winter months in good years. So there's going to be some years where there's no diversion whatsoever under the assumptions of scenario 1. And just so everyone kind of gets the picture, in case you haven't read the two basin solution models, the key months are September and October in every year. In some years, there's still water in Lake Mendocino. In other years, Lake Mendocino runs out entirely. That's when there's no diversion at all. It's approximately, I believe it's 56% of the years. So half of the years, using historical analysis, the Lake Mendocino would drain sometime during September and October. It is hard to predict what the state water boards would do. And we'll never be able to model that process. But our best guess at the moment is that water rationing for people and complete cutoff for agriculture would happen for some number of water rights in probably 7 or 8 out of every 10 years, without any diversion at all. Note that even with the diversion, there still will be plenty of water rationing. As it is, we've somehow managed already to get the level of diversions down 70% from where they were in the years around 2000, but we still have more to go, and water rationing is how you do that. And of course, there's political and publicity relations to anytime you do water rationing. People don't like it. But that is in our future with either of these scenarios. It's only a matter of how often. So these are the scenarios that we're proposing simply so we can leverage as much as we can the 2-basin solution work. And our question for the planning group is, are these the 2 we should go after? Please don't ask us to do 3, because that means even less progress. In order to give you something clear, in order to get it done in time, we need to limit the range of exploration. So just to be mindful of time, I've gone very quickly. I'm happy to take questions on any of these slides, but I wanted to give you folks time to react and time to ask questions.
Thanks very much, Dave. Anna, I've seen you've had your hand up for a bit. Why don't you go first? And then Dawn, I see you've got a note, a comment in the chat. So let's get to that next.
I was hoping that the presentation, if it's going to include how things have been, the new diversion and no diversion, if there could be a mention of how things were before, as in how things were before any of the dams went up, because the native people, multiple tribes, all relied on salmon for their subsistence, and they can no longer do that. And I feel like that's an important perspective to bring in all of this. And I recognize that there's a lot of people's lives and livelihoods that are dependent now upon the diversion, but also that there's people's lives and livelihoods that were dependent on a source of food that's no longer available to them.
That's a really, really good point. When it comes to water rights, I'm not aware that we ever wrote contracts for fish to have water rights. Yes, of course, fish need them, but that's something that I don't believe we're competent to answer. The before situation would be the pre-1914 water rights, and we'll certainly talk about those, but the impact on the fisheries, I don't believe we have the membership or the competence to answer that. I think the 2-basin solution did do some of that analysis, but I'm not competent to opine on that. What we can do is reiterate what the 2-basin solution model shows for. Here's what we think will happen under scenario 1 and scenario 2 to begin to repopulate the fisheries. Of course, these are models, and that's the best we can do, right, at this point. They did do some of that modeling work, and I will commit to at least reiterating what they did. As far as taking it any further, I'm not sure that we have the competence to do that. But we would be totally supportive if someone has the funds or the competence to get a consultant and get them in there modeling that even better.
Okay,
Yeah,
I
and
think I just meant more of like an acknowledgement in the how things have been section.
Sure. Mhm.
That there's not just how things have been since the dams have been put up, but how
Got it.
things were before the dams were
Got
put
it.
up.
And of course, we also have 100 years of climate change to account for in there too. And it's not very good for the fish. The climate change hasn't helped them. So we will absolutely acknowledge that. Fair?
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for that comment, Anna. We can certainly, as the reports coming together, we'll circle back with you and make sure that we've addressed that.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go to Bree, and then I see Dawn and then Megan. Go ahead, Bree.
Yeah, Dave, I think you just touched on this, but my question has to do with the use of client science modeling on these diversions, because, you know, using the past is not of much use moving forward with all the changes due to climate. And so can you assure me that that's included in these modelings?
The two basin solution folks did do, I think it was 5 separate scenarios of what they think the effect will be. Fortunately, they already did that work. And that is, you know, of course, we're piling one model on top of another model. The general consensus of the 5 models that they did was that during dry periods, those dry periods will last longer and be drier than what we've experienced in the prior 100 years. And during the wet years, there will be more abundant production during the wet years. And it was on that basis that the two basin solution was supportive of diversional activities during the wet years, during the wet months, because there already would be more water than there was historically. Again, we're piling models on top of models, but this is the best science we have. Again, we would be thrilled to be able to do even more work in this area, but to get the planning group an output in time for November, I don't think we have the funds or the expertise to do anything more than the two basin solution did. But we will certainly include that as well. It's an important element for people to understand.
Okay, let's go to Dawn and then Megan.
Thank you. I did put a note in the chat, and just, you know, my recollection, it's been some years, I did ask the question when they presented these scenarios back in the two basin solution, and I recall that the scenario 2, no diversion, assumed present demands. And I'm not posing a question so much as making a comment that, you know, the whole focus of resiliency is one, to change the dynamics of supply, and also hopefully affect the dynamics of demand to shift where these model outputs landed. So just more of a comment, but the other thing I wanted to vocalize that too, in case I have that wrong, so we could get good information out here for the group. If that did assume any kind of demand reduction and someone recalls that, please correct me. Thank you.
Thank you, Don.
I believe there was an assumption of some demand reduction, but I don't. It's certainly did not include the aquifer recharge and other potential projects that could use the water even more effectively. I think the input that I've heard from the ag community is they've already done a lot. And in my particular water production area, we have since 2014 reduced our consumption by 67%. So there's been a lot of work in this area. This is certainly going to highlight the need to reduce demands further. But it's hard to predict how political entities are going to respond. For example, the city of Cloverdale didn't really enforce water rationing, whereas we absolutely did outside of Cloverdale and in our community. We actually were able to get consumption down below 45 gallons per person per day. It means nobody does any gardening, but it can be done. But various cities had various levels of enforcement, and that's something that we need to start applying some pressure to in order to get better use of the water.
Yeah, I'll just comment that there is so much more efficiency in both ag and urban that can be realized. That's certainly something that can be drilled down further, but I would disagree that we've reached the peak of efficiency. We have so much.
I didn't say we reached the peak.
Yeah,
but
I thought I was
done a
hearing
lot.
you say that.
Well, no, in terms of for my community, the legal limit is 55 gallons per day. That's what the law says. So you can get as efficient as you want below that, but you are entitled to that no matter what you do.
Yeah, no, there's a lot people can do, and I think, you know, we just need to be a lot more creative, and there's a lot of things that are not being done in the ag world because of viticultural purposes or reasons, goals, what have you. You know, and if we revisit that, I think there's a lot we can do. But my comment was just to note that, you know, hopefully we're going to improve the supply through winter capture. Hopefully we can reduce the demand and kind of start closing these gaps instead of presenting this absolutist doomsday scenario. I think we can make changes.
Oh, there's no question. And behavior modification is going to be a big part of it. Just to, you know, we don't want to be political here, but there will be political backlash if we do anything really too fast. And that's just a reality. I'm not saying I'm going to do it. I'm just saying people will start getting very, very annoyed.
Yeah, I'm gonna move us on. I do want to make sure we have time for public comment. And it's about 12:40 and I want to wrap up on time. So I'm going to go to Megan and Glenn, and then I'm hoping I can move us on. As a reminder, the working group is meeting on Monday. So this conversation can be continued there. Go ahead, Megan.
Thanks. I think I can make this just a quick question. I just was curious about storage mechanisms and the extent to which those will be evaluated in this process, if at all.
So again, in our purview in water rights is just figuring out the impacts. To the best of my knowledge, there are no fully funded projects for more storage. In fact, there are studies, but that's about it. And I'm not even sure that the even partial funding is in the next fiscal year's budget. So other people can comment on that, but we're assuming we got what we got.
Thanks for the clarification.
Sure.
Okay, Supervisor McGordy.
So real quick, I think there is a move afoot to create more water efficient vineyards. So certainly in my tenure as the University of California wine growing advisor for Mendocino and Lake counties, I was telling everyone, when you're choosing rootstocks, make sure that they can do the most with the least when it comes to water, because we need to start thinking about that with climate change and competing interests for water. And certainly that's a direction that at least the University of California has been encouraging growers to look at. Also, there's been significant development of recycled water use, at least in the Ukiah Valley. And finally, we're also looking at groundwater storage as being a logical place to put water because you don't need to build a big structure. And this is one of my concerns about the Ukiah Valley, is that with the incision of the Russian River Channel, we've dropped water tables. So there's a possibility with grade control structures to be able to store a lot more water underground if we can bring the level of the river up so that we're not losing water to the river during the summertime. So I think there are a lot of possibilities to reflect what Don was just talking about. So we haven't reached any kind of perfect place for water conservation and creative ways of making our water stretch further.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, I would love to have more water storage, and it's a matter of applying the right pressures so those projects get funded. I need to hand over the microphone. Thank you very much, everyone, for your time.
Thank you, Dave, for the presentation. Appreciate it. Okay, I'm going to move us on to public comment. So if any members of the public, non-planning group members, are interested in providing a comment, let's go to the next slide, please, Henry. Raise your hand. We're going to ask folks to keep it within 90 seconds if possible. And we're here to hear your comment. We're not going to be responding to it, but your comment will be captured in the meeting summary that will be posted on the website. So let's go with Matt Myers and then Rue Furch. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, Matt Myers, California Department of Fish and Wildlife. I just wanted to make the comment because I've heard a couple of times and also in the press release that we have been consulted with. Our staff is participating in the technical meetings for the diversion, but that's from a technical input level. And it shouldn't be extrapolated to that as either support or not support of a certain proposal or diversion. And I think the press release kind of also had language in there that could be misinterpreted, that we have been consulted with and supportive. So just wanted to make it clear that, you know, we're participating as in a technical advisory capacity, and participation does not mean support or rejection in any way.
Understood. Thanks, Matt, for that clarification. Let's go to Rue, and then I see John Almeida. And go ahead, Rue. Can you unmute yourself?
I can. How's that?
You're
That
loud and
works?
clear.
Okay, great. There's a lot I could say about all of this, but I think the key thing for me, having participated in Sigma and all the previous iterations of water rights and water availability and all the other relatively small issues relative to water availability, is the one thing that seems to be being encouraged here, and I think can't be stressed enough, is the issue of transparency. The funding, either through agencies and governmental funding, that money's going to come from something else, and so the trade-offs will be made, and the rest of the money will probably come from citizens like myself and everybody else who lives downstream. If what we have learned through Sigma is that people need to be made aware of the process throughout the process. It can't be an announcement at the end, or even a disclosure at the end, especially given that there's this new framework, new structure that's going to be governing it. It's really, really important to make sure that outreach and transparency and availability of all the information going on is available throughout. And I want to credit David for his presentation. It was, I thought, very mindful of how things are working, and so I appreciated that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rue. John Almeida.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, John.
I've been a resident of Mendocino County for 67 years, and my family's been here 112 years. I worked in the construction industry. I seen how the water from the Russian River acts in the Ukiah Basin. Back in the years when they were mining a quarter mile away for gravel, they don't allow it today, you'd see the water going there. And I asked one time, I said, where's this water coming from? And they said the Russian River. Several areas down there are so porous that that water keeps that aquifer up. Without these transfers of water, you're taking the last working hub in Mendocino County and putting them in danger of being able to provide work for people of Mendocino County. I also commuted 13 years to Ukiah. My wife commuted 21 years from Willits to Ukiah. With the lack of industry, there is no other places to work. People commute from Lake County to Ukiah to work. Willits is a bedroom community. Fort Bragg is a tourist community. Protecting the environment and having water down there is so very important to that community, all the way from Redwood Valley throughout Mendocino County that depends on that water, plus in the cities in Sonoma County. I don't think the people realize, I realize to see that you guys bent over backwards on this new policy or proposal to help the environmental community by going ahead and saying, okay, let's take out both dams and let's just provide for a diversion when it's needed. And that's not gonna happen in the summertime without those dams. Those diversions are done. So it would be only during high water in the wintertime. And the environmental community still can't accept that. Now, if they can't accept that, it tells me that it's a power thing. It is not about environmentalism, because if it was, they'd be after these illegal dope grows, and you never hear the environmental community talk about them. And all the pollution they've caused has caused more damage than the loggers ever did. This is what gets me. You're bending over backwards to help these people so that the fish can come back, and the illegal grows are polluting the river, and the squawfish are killing the salmon. And we're going to lose Lake Pillsbury, which is a big asset to fire protection in the Mendocino National Forest. All of these things are something to think about. But when we lose the working hub, the last working hub in Mendocino, because businesses pull out because there's no water, then your government starts collapsing, and that includes police protection for Covelo and several other things that it provides. So I hope everybody's thinking about that. And thank you for allowing me to comment.
Thank you, John. Gail Seymour. Right there, Gail, can you go off mute?
Sorry about that. Thank you. I'm pretty new to all this, but all I wanted to say is that obviously this is all about water, and water is highly political. And the way we're headed, there's not going to be enough ever for everyone and for all of our species. So it seems like there's been more talk about water for human water use and for fish passage. I was wondering what discussion has taken place as far as the amount of water that's needed in the Eel main stem and tributaries for aquatic species. And I don't know if we need years of modeling to determine that. Also, I'm wondering what the counties, Sonoma and Mendocino, are doing to curb development, especially vineyard expansion and new vineyard development, so that water diversions from the Eel can be reduced. And I live in the Russian River Basin in the lower part, and boy, I'll tell you, there is a lot of water waste, and the conservation has to be tightened up, not just for the eel and for the Russian and for the people, but for everything. We're just not going to have enough water, including groundwater. So we keep increasing the demand while we allow the extinction of our fish and wildlife. So please let me know how I can get more information about what's been discussed about water conservation and curbing development. Thank you.
Thank you, Gail. Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands. Oh, go ahead, Caitlin.
Yeah, just a quick question. I'm wondering if the materials from these meetings can be made available either after the meeting or like if people can't make it to all of these meetings, if there's a way to access the materials.
Yes, 100%. So there's a website which we can put that link in the chat for you. So materials from all the previous planning group meetings are there. And we're also, as the working groups meet, we're posting materials for those meetings too. So we'll have the presentations from today's meeting up on the website soon, and then we'll have the summary from the discussion a little bit later. But yeah, our approach here is to put all the materials up on the website so people can get them easily. Okay, not any other public comments, not seeing any other hands. Okay, well, thank you all to those who did provide public comment. Let's go to our next slide, and we'll wrap up here a couple minutes early. So, just wanted for today's meeting, just acknowledging that there's a pretty significant development in the process here, a lot to consider and unpack and really think through next steps. So again, want to thank our presenters on the new proposal for adding some clarity where we could, and I think some of those details are going to come out as we move through the process here. And I did think it was a helpful discussion around where we go from here, and want to just acknowledge the concerns we heard about making sure that we're being clear and fair about how we characterize where there's agreement and being careful about that. So I think it's something we can really keep in mind. And I think and ask for transparency here and a clear understanding of what the role of the planning group is envisioned here. And so that's something we're gonna need to work on as we move forward here. So and thank you, Dave, again for your presentation on water rights. And it sounds like generally that's headed in a really positive direction. In terms of future meetings, so this meeting was rescheduled. And so actually the next planning group meeting is coming up pretty soon. So it's on September 7th. So we're going to be meeting with the steering committee. It's going to be meeting tomorrow. And so at that meeting, we'll think through agenda topics for the next planning group meeting. If planning group members have things specifically you'd want to cover, feel free to send us an email. And then future meetings, again, it's first Thursday of the month. So we'll be meeting October 5th and then November 2nd, December 7th. On the working group side, water rights and water management, again, that's coming up this Monday. I believe the information for that meeting is on the website. And then finance and economics working group and the Russian River Resiliency Subcommittee. Those are TBD, the dates, but those will likely be sometime in September. So stay tuned. We'll announce as soon as we have those dates confirmed. Okay. So that is it. I want to just thank everyone for participating today. It looks like we got good attendance, which is always good. And certainly more to come. We're gonna adjourn for now. Give you all about 5 more minutes, and thank you all again. And certainly more to come here.
Thank you, everyone.